Dust devils danced across the scorching Mojave tarmac, mirroring the restless energy within the hangar. Emily, lost in the intricate wiring of a Huey, barely registered the swagger of the returning Marine pilots until one caught sight of a faded patch, a ghost of a Squadron emblem clinging to her locker. In that instant, the casual banter died, replaced by a stunned silence as a name, a call sign whispered from a pilot's lips, unveiled a past no one in that dusty desert workshop could have ever imagined. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The clang of wrenches and the whir of power tools were the dominant symphony in Hangar 7 at the sprawling Marine Corps Air Station Mojave. Emily Tran, small and wiry with hands perpetually stained with grease, moved with a focused intensity around the skeletal frame of a Sh-53E Super Stallion helicopter. At 28, she possessed a preternatural knack for coaxing life back into battered aircraft, a skill honed over years spent immersed in the intricate mechanics of rotary wing aviation. Her days were long, often stretching from the pre-dawn chill to the star-dusted desert nights, filled with the demanding rhythm of inspection, repair, and the constant battle against the abrasive Mojave dust. The Marine pilots who frequented the hangar held a curious mix of respect and condescension for the civilian mechanics. They appreciated the skill that kept their birds airworthy, but their swagger often extended to patronizing explanations of flight diagnostics, pronouncements Emily usually met with a quiet nod and a more accurate, technically detailed counter-assessment once their backs were turned. They chuckled amongst themselves about the shop girl, who dared to question their aerial expertise, unaware of the quiet confidence that simmered beneath her grease-stained brow. One particularly brutal afternoon, the heat radiating off the tarmac felt thick enough to swim in. Captain Marcus Hale, a decorated Tran Z Viper pilot, with a reputation for both daring maneuvers and unwavering self-assurance, strode into Hangar 7, his flight suit still bearing the faint creases of the cockpit seat. His mission had been a long and demanding one, and he carried a weary but satisfied air. He was there to debrief the maintenance crew about a minor vibration issue his attack helicopter had developed during a training exercise. He approached a group of mechanics huddled around his Viper, their heads bent in concentration. Emily was among them, her slender frame partially obscured by the helicopter's tail rotor assembly. Hale launched into his explanation, peppered with aviation jargon and confident pronouncements about potential causes, his voice carrying across the hangar. Emily, without looking up, offered a quiet correction. "Captain, the vibration you described is more consistent with a slight imbalance in the intermediate gearbox, not the tail rotor hub. We ran diagnostics remotely during your flight, and the telemetry supports that." A ripple of suppressed amusement ran through the other mechanics. Hale, mid-sentence, paused, his brow furrowing. He turned towards the source of the interruption, his gaze finally landing on Emily. He saw only a young civilian mechanic, her face smudged with grease, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail escaping the confines of her cap. "With all due respect, ma'am," Hale began, his tone laced with polite disbelief, "I've been flying these birds for 10 years. I think I have a pretty good feel for what's going on with my aircraft." Emily finally straightened up, wiping her hands on a rag. Her gaze, steady and direct, met Hale's. "And, with all due respect, Captain, I've been tearing these birds apart and putting them back together for the last 7. Telemetry doesn't lie." A tense silence fell over the small group. Hale, accustomed to deference, was momentarily taken aback by her quiet certainty. He opened his mouth to retort, but a more senior mechanic, a grizzled veteran named Reyes, stepped forward, a wry smile on his face. "The kid's got a point, Captain," Reyes chuckled, nodding towards Emily. "She's got an ear for these things. More than half the time, she's right." Hale, his pride slightly dented but his professionalism intact, conceded with a curt nod. "All right, Reyes. We'll take a look at the intermediate gearbox then." He turned to address the other mechanics, dismissing Emily's input with a subtle shift in his focus. Emily simply shrugged and returned to her work, the pilot's skepticism a familiar, if mildly irritating background noise. She didn't seek their validation. Her satisfaction came from the precise click of a perfectly torqued bolt, the smooth hum of a restored engine. Later that evening, as the hangar emptied, Emily lingered, finishing up some paperwork at her cluttered locker. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the concrete floor, and the silence was broken only by the occasional gust of wind whistling through the open bay doors. On the side of her locker, partially obscured by a faded tool catalog and a worn photograph of her family, was a small, rectangular patch. It was old, its colors muted by time and the harsh desert sun, but the stylized image of a black silhouette against a moonlit sky was still discernible. Beneath the image were two words: Phantom Squadron. Captain Marcus Hale, having finished his debrief and still mulling over the young mechanic's unexpected assertiveness, had returned to the hangar to retrieve a forgotten flight manual. As he walked past the row of lockers, his gaze idly drifted across the personal touches that adorned them. It was then that he saw it: the faded patch on Emily Tran's locker. His steps faltered. His breath caught in his throat. He stopped dead, his eyes fixed on the emblem, his blood running cold. He knew that patch. He knew that silhouette. He knew, with a certainty that sent a jolt through him, what Phantom Squadron represented. It wasn't just any aviation unit. It was a legendary, highly classified squadron, known for its daring night operations and its elite cadre of pilots. Pilots who were the stuff of whispered rumors and hushed reverence within the tight-knit marine aviation community. And then he saw the call sign, embroidered in faded silver thread beneath the squadron emblem: Nightshade. The color drained from Hale's face. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the quiet, unassuming mechanic with the almost mythical figure associated with that call sign. Nightshade. A pilot whispered about in hushed tones, a phantom of the skies during a particularly volatile period in the Corps history. A pilot who had vanished without a trace years ago, leaving behind only legends and speculation. He walked slowly towards the locker, his gaze locked on the patch as if it held the secrets of the universe. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers hovering just above the faded fabric. Could it be? Could this unassuming woman, this shop girl who corrected his flight diagnostics, possibly be that Nightshade? The timeline didn't seem to fit. The person he remembered hearing about, the pilot spoken of with such awe, would likely be older. But the patch, the call sign, it was unmistakable. He had to know. He had to ask. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the now mostly empty hangar. He spotted Emily near a workbench, meticulously cleaning a set of rotor blades. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest, and walked towards her, the weight of his realization pressing down on him. "Tran," he said, his voice low, the usual confident timbre replaced by a note of stunned disbelief. Emily looked up, her expression neutral. "Captain Hale, something I can help you with?" Hale's eyes were fixed on the faded patch visible on her locker behind her. "That patch," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Phantom Squadron. You flew with them?" Emily's eyes flickered towards her locker, a fleeting shadow crossing her face. She looked back at Hale, her expression unreadable. "A long time ago, Captain," she replied, her voice carefully devoid of emotion. Hale went pale. Your Nightshade?" A profound silence fell over the hangar, the vast space suddenly feeling charged with an unspoken history. Emily Tran, the quiet mechanic, simply met Captain Marcus Hale's stunned gaze, and in the depths of her dark eyes, he saw a flicker of something that confirmed the unbelievable truth. The stunned silence in the hangar stretched, punctuated only by the whisper of the desert wind against the corrugated metal walls. Captain Hale stood frozen, the casual confidence that usually defined him utterly shattered. He stared at Emily, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the unassuming mechanic before him with the legendary figure of Nightshade. It was like discovering that the quiet librarian in your hometown was secretly a decorated war hero. The disconnect was absolute, yet the faded patch on her locker offered irrefutable evidence. Emily, for her part, remained remarkably composed, her hands stilling on the rotor blade she had been cleaning. The initial surprise on her face had vanished. replaced by a guarded neutrality, a carefully constructed wall that had likely served her well over the years. "Captain," she said, her voice low and even. "As I said, that was a long time ago, a different life." There was a subtle emphasis on the last phrase, a clear indication that she preferred to leave that past undisturbed. But Hale was too stunned, too intrigued, to let it go. Phantom Squadron wasn't just a squadron. It was the Squadron, a clandestine unit that operated in the gray areas of military engagement, undertaking missions so sensitive they were never officially acknowledged. To have actually encountered someone who flew with them, let alone someone he had dismissed as a mere mechanic, was beyond comprehension. And Nightshade, the call sign carried an almost mythical weight. Stories, fragmented and often contradictory, circulated within the aviation community about a pilot of exceptional skill and daring, a phantom in the night who had seemingly vanished after a particularly dangerous operation. But Nightshade, Hale stammered, still struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. The stories, they were incredible. You were legendary. The word felt inadequate, almost comical, when applied to the woman standing before him in grease-stained overalls. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Emily's lips, a fleeting glimpse of a different persona, a ghost of the pilot she once was. Legends are just stories, Captain, and stories often have very little to do with the truth. Reyes, the senior mechanic who had earlier interjected, approached cautiously, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He looked from the pale-faced captain to the uncharacteristically quiet Emily, his brow furrowed with curiosity and a hint of concern. "Everything all right here, Captain? Tran?" Hale, still fixated on Emily, barely registered Ray's presence. "Race, did you know about this?" He gestured vaguely towards Emily and the patch on her locker. Rays looked at Emily, a question in his eyes. Emily gave a barely perceptible shake of her head, a silent plea for him to remain silent. "Know what, Captain?" Rays asked, playing along, his loyalty clearly lying with Emily. "Just that Tran's a damn good mechanic. Best we got." Hale seemed to snap out of his daze, a flicker of his usual assertiveness returning. He realized he was in a military hangar, and the personal history of a civilian mechanic, no matter how extraordinary, wasn't exactly public domain. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "Right," Hale said, his voice regaining some of its authoritative tone. "Of course. Just surprised to see the Phantom Squadron patch. It's an older unit." Emily met his gaze, her eyes holding a subtle warning. "Some things are best left in the past, Captain." Hale, a seasoned pilot trained to read subtle cues, understood the unspoken message. He wouldn't press her. Not here. Not now. But the revelation had shaken him to his core. The quiet mechanic he had casually dismissed held a history he couldn't even begin to fathom. The hangar, the dusty aircraft, the mundane routine of repairs, suddenly seemed to exist within a much larger, more complex narrative. He nodded curtly. "Understood, Tran. Carry on." He turned and walked away, his mind still reeling. The image of the faded patch burned into his memory. As he left Hangar 7 and stepped back into the blinding Mojave sunlight, he knew one thing for certain. He would never look at Emily Tran, or any mechanic for that matter, the same way again. The world, he realized, was full of hidden histories, of extraordinary lives lived in the shadows, waiting for a chance encounter to bring them, however briefly, into the light. And the quiet woman who fixed helicopters in the desert held a story that was just beginning to unravel in his mind. The days following Captain Hale's discovery in the hangar carried a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Hale, though he kept his word and didn't openly discuss Emily's past, couldn't shake the weight of his revelation. He found himself observing her more intently, noticing the almost imperceptible air of quiet confidence she exuded, the way her hands moved with a precision that spoke of years of intense training, not just in mechanics. He saw fleeting glimpses of a different Emily, a ghost of the pilot he now knew she once was. The other pilots, oblivious to Hale's internal turmoil, continued their casual interactions with Emily, their occasional condescension now carrying a layer of unintentional irony in Hale's mind. He would listen to their offhand remarks, their dismissive assumptions, with a newfound awareness of the extraordinary woman standing among them, a woman who had once soared through the night skies in missions they could only imagine. For Emily, life in Hangar 7 continued much as it always had. She immersed herself in her work, the intricate mechanics of the helicopters providing a welcome distraction from the resurfacing memories of her past. She had built a life of quiet anonymity in the Mojave, a deliberate distancing from the intense pressures and profound losses of her time with Phantom Squadron. The faded patch on her locker was a carefully curated relic, a reminder she kept for herself, never expecting anyone in her current life to recognize it. Captain Hale's unexpected recognition had stirred the dormant echoes of that past, a gentle tremor in the carefully constructed stability of her present. One particularly slow afternoon, Hale found himself near Emily's workbench, feigning interest in a maintenance manual. He hesitated for a long moment, grappling with his curiosity and his promise of silence. Finally, he couldn't resist. "Tran," he began, his voice low, ensuring no one else was within earshot. "Phantom Squadron. What kind of missions did you fly?" He immediately regretted the question, feeling like he was crossing a line. Emily looked up from her work, her gaze steady. There was no anger in her eyes, but a definite reserve. "Captain, as I said, it was a long time ago. And the details, they're classified." Hale nodded, acknowledging her boundary. "Of course, I understand. It's just the reputation. Phantom Squadron was something else." A flicker of something that might have been pride, or perhaps just a wry acknowledgement of the truth, crossed Emily's face. "We did what was necessary." Her answer was clipped, offering no further information. Hale tried a different approach. "The call sign, Nightshade, where did it come from?" This time, a softer expression touched Emily's features, a hint of the memory long held. "It was given to me by my flight lead. He said I had a knack for operating in the dark, and that I was elusive." There was a faint sadness in her voice, a subtle undertone that spoke of loss. Hale sensed he was treading on sensitive ground. He didn't press further, but the brief glimpse into her past, the hint at the person she once was, only deepened his fascination and respect. He understood now that the quiet mechanic wasn't just skilled with tools. She possessed a steely resolve, a quiet intensity that likely served her well in the demanding world of elite military aviation. From that day forward, Hale's interactions with Emily subtly shifted. The casual condescension was gone, replaced by a respectful acknowledgement, a quiet understanding that existed beneath the surface of their professional exchanges. He would still seek her technical expertise, but now he listened with a different ear, recognizing the depth of her knowledge and the layers of experience that informed her insights. The other mechanics, noticing Hale's change in demeanor, also began to regard Emily with a newfound respect, their earlier amusement replaced by a quiet admiration. The faded patch on Emily's locker remained, a silent testament to a life lived in the shadows and the extraordinary secret she carried within the ordinary routine of Hangar 7. It was a reminder that appearances could be profoundly deceiving, and that the quietest individuals often held the most remarkable stories. And for Captain Marcus Hale, the Mojave Desert, once a landscape of routine operations, had become a place where the extraordinary could be found in the most unexpected of people. Weeks turned into months, and the initial shock of Captain Hale's discovery settled into a quiet understanding between him and Emily. They never spoke directly of her past again, but a subtle current of respect flowed between them during their professional interactions. Hale found himself trusting her diagnostic skills implicitly, often seeking her opinion on complex mechanical issues before consulting even the senior mechanics. He had come to recognize the sharp intellect and the intuitive understanding of aircraft that lay beneath her unassuming exterior. One particularly challenging repair involved a critical hydraulic system failure on a Marine One helicopter, a high-stakes situation that drew attention from senior officers. The troubleshooting process was complex and time-sensitive, with pressure mounting to get the aircraft back in service. Various teams of mechanics pored over schematics and ran diagnostics, but the root cause remained elusive. Amidst the organized chaos, Emily quietly worked in her corner of the hangar, her focus unwavering. She had been assigned to a different section of the repair, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the prevailing theories were overlooking something crucial. Late into the night, long after most of the other mechanics had called it a day, Emily stayed behind, poring over the hydraulic schematics, her brow furrowed in concentration. An idea sparked, a subtle anomaly in the system that others had dismissed as a minor fluctuation. She approached Hale, who was overseeing the repair efforts, his face etched with fatigue and frustration. "Captain," she said quietly, her voice barely above the hum of the hangar's ventilation system, "have we considered a potential microfracture in the auxiliary pump's bypass valve? The telemetry from the initial failure showed a pressure drop that could be consistent with that." Hale, weary and under pressure, initially dismissed her suggestion. "Tran, we've run multiple pressure tests on that line. It's holding. But a microfracture might only open under specific stress conditions, Captain." Emily persisted, her gaze steady. The initial report mentioned a sudden, unusual maneuver just before the failure. That could have stressed the system in a way that wouldn't be replicated in a static pressure test. Hale hesitated. He trusted Emily's technical intuition, but the idea of tearing down a section of the hydraulic system based on a hunch was a significant undertaking with the clock ticking. Yet, something in her quiet certainty gave him pause. "All right, Tran," he conceded, his voice grudging. "Let's take a look. But if we don't find anything..." Emily simply nodded and immediately began gathering the necessary tools. Working with focused precision, she and a small team followed her lead, carefully disassembling the section of the hydraulic system around the auxiliary pump. Hours later, under the glare of the hangar lights, they found a hairline fracture in the bypass valve, almost invisible to the naked eye, but undeniably the source of the catastrophic failure. A wave of relief washed over the hangar. Senior officers, who had been monitoring the progress with growing anxiety, expressed their gratitude. Hale, his initial skepticism replaced by profound respect, approached Emily, a genuine admiration in his eyes. "Tran," he said, extending his hand. "You were right. You found it. You saved us a lot of time, and a lot of potential headaches." Emily simply shook his hand, a small, almost shy smile on her face. "Just doing my job, Captain." But everyone in the hangar knew it was more than just doing her job. It was the insight of someone with an exceptional understanding of aircraft, an understanding that went far beyond the manuals and schematics. It was the intuition of a pilot who had once pushed these machines to their limits, who knew their every nuance and vulnerability. From that day forward, any lingering doubts about Emily Tran's capabilities vanished. The pilots still joked and swaggered, but their interactions with her carried a new weight, a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary talent hidden beneath her unassuming exterior. They started seeking her advice, not just on mechanical issues, but even on flight-related concerns, recognizing that her perspective as a former pilot offered a unique and invaluable insight. The faded patch on her locker remained, no longer just a silent reminder of her past, but a subtle symbol of the extraordinary woman who walked among them, a woman who had traded the skies for the hangar floor, but whose deep understanding of aviation continued to soar. As time progressed, whispers of Emily's uncanny ability to diagnose complex aircraft issues began to circulate beyond Hangar 7, reaching the ears of higher-ranking officers within the air station. Her reputation as an exceptionally skilled mechanic, one with an almost preternatural understanding of helicopters, grew steadily. One crisp morning, a formal request came down the chain of command. Emily was to report to the office of Colonel Davies, the air station's commanding officer. The summons was brief and offered no explanation, fueling a sense of unease among her colleagues and a quiet flicker of apprehension within Emily herself. Colonel Davies' office was a stark contrast to the gritty functionality of the hangar. Polished wood, framed commendations, and a panoramic view of the sprawling air station conveyed an air of authority and strategic oversight. The colonel, a stern-faced man with a distinguished air, rose from behind his imposing desk as Emily entered, his gaze direct and assessing. "Ms. Tran," he began, his voice formal. "Have a seat." Emily sat, her posture ramrod straight, her gaze unwavering despite the unfamiliar surroundings. "Your reputation precedes you," Colonel Davies continued, his eyes holding a keen interest. "Specifically, your remarkable ability to diagnose and resolve complex aircraft malfunctions. Captain Hale has spoken highly of your skills, as have others." Emily remained silent, unsure where this was leading. "We have a unique situation," the colonel explained, leaning forward. "A highly sensitive project involving a prototype aircraft. We've encountered a persistent and baffling mechanical issue that our engineers and test pilots have been unable to resolve. Captain Hale suggested you might have a different perspective." Emily's breath caught slightly. "A prototype?" This was far beyond the usual routine of Hangar 7. "We understand your background is somewhat unconventional for a civilian mechanic," Colonel Davies continued, his gaze briefly flicking towards her service record, which he clearly had in front of him. "Captain Hale informed us of your prior service." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Specifically, your time with Phantom Squadron." Emily's carefully constructed composure wavered for a fraction of a second. The fact that Hale had shared that information, even with a commanding officer in the context of her skills, felt like a significant breach of her carefully guarded privacy. Colonel Davies, however, seemed to view it purely from a strategic standpoint. "Ms. Tran, Phantom Squadron had a reputation for pushing aircraft to their absolute limits, often operating with experimental technology. It stands to reason that you might possess a unique understanding of the kind of stresses and vulnerabilities that could be affecting this prototype." He slid a thick file across the desk. "The schematics and diagnostic reports are in there. We need someone with an unconventional mind. Someone who can think outside the box. Someone with your experience." Emily looked at the file, her mind racing. This was a direct appeal to her past, the very life she had tried to leave behind. But the idea of working on a cutting-edge aircraft, of applying her deep understanding of aviation to a new challenge, was undeniably tempting. "Colonel," she said, her voice steady despite the internal conflict. "I'm the mechanic now. My flight days are over." "We're not asking you to fly it, Ms. Tran," Colonel Davies replied, his gaze firm. "We need your expertise on the ground. We need you to diagnose the problem. Your past experience makes you uniquely qualified for this task. This project is critical to national security. Will you help us?" Emily looked at the file again, then met the colonel's direct gaze. The mechanic in her, the problem solver, felt the pull of the challenge. And the ghost of the pilot she once was stirred within her, a faint echo of the thrill of pushing boundaries and unraveling complex systems. After a long moment of silent contemplation, Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, Colonel, I'll take a look." The prototype aircraft was housed in a secure, isolated hangar, a stark contrast to the bustling activity of Hangar 7. Security personnel guarded the entrance, and a palpable air of secrecy hung in the cavernous space. The aircraft itself was a marvel of engineering, a sleek, futuristic design that hinted at capabilities far beyond those of existing models. Emily was granted access, accompanied by a team of engineers who regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They were highly qualified professionals, steeped in theoretical knowledge and complex algorithms, but they had been stumped by this persistent mechanical anomaly. Emily approached the aircraft with a familiar sense of focus. She didn't immediately delve into the schematics, preferring instead to walk around the prototype, her hands lightly tracing the lines of its airframe, her senses absorbing the nuances of its construction. It was a method she had developed during her time with Phantom Squadron, an intuitive connection with the machine that often yielded insights overlooked by data-driven analysis. She spent hours in the hangar, poring over the technical documents, listening to the engineers' theories, and meticulously examining every accessible component of the aircraft. The issue was intermittent, a subtle malfunction that occurred under specific, unpredictable conditions, making it incredibly difficult to pinpoint. The engineers, initially polite but doubtful, began to take notice of Emily's methodical approach and the insightful questions she posed. Her understanding of the aircraft seemed to go beyond the diagrams, informed by a deep, almost visceral knowledge of how such machines behaved under extreme stress. Days turned into nights as Emily immersed herself in the project. She would often work late, the silence of the secure hangar broken only by the hum of the prototype systems and the focused murmur of her voice as she discussed potential causes with the engineering team. She drew upon her experience pushing the limits of classified aircraft, recalling subtle vibrations, unusual pressure readings, and the kind of unexpected failures that could occur when technology was pushed beyond its known parameters. One evening, while reviewing telemetry data from a recent test flight, Emily noticed a fleeting, almost imperceptible spike in a sensor reading related to a newly designed hydraulic actuator in the aircraft's advanced flight control system. The engineers had dismissed it as a sensor glitch, but something about the anomaly resonated with a memory from her time with Phantom Squadron, a similar issue with an experimental control system on a classified aircraft. She presented her findings to the lead engineer, a brilliant but somewhat dismissive scientist named Dr. Anya Sharma. Dr. Sharma listened politely, but expressed skepticism. "Ms. Tran, that spike is well within the margin of error for that sensor. Our simulations indicate no possibility of a malfunction in that actuator under the reported flight conditions." Emily, recalling Colonel Davies' words about needing someone who could think outside the box, stood her ground. "Dr. Sharma, with all due respect, simulations don't always account for every real-world variable, especially with bleeding-edge technology. The conditions reported by the test pilot included a rapid, high-G maneuver that might have stressed that actuator in a way your models haven't captured. I believe we should take a closer look." Dr. Sharma, accustomed to her authority being unquestioned, hesitated. But Emily's quiet confidence, and the fact that all other avenues had been exhausted, prompted a grudging concession. The next day, the team focused on the specific hydraulic actuator Emily had identified. It was deeply integrated into the aircraft structure, requiring a significant disassembly to access. Hours passed as the engineers carefully followed Emily's guidance. Finally, they reached the actuator. Upon close inspection, under high-powered magnification, they found it a microscopic flaw in the actuator's internal seal, a defect that would only manifest under extreme pressure and specific dynamic loads, precisely the conditions described during the problematic test flight. A stunned silence fell over the engineering team. Dr. Sharma approached Emily, her initial skepticism replaced by genuine respect. "Ms. Tran," she said, extending her hand, "you were absolutely correct. How did you—" Emily simply replied, a faint echo of her pilot days in her voice. "Sometimes, you just have to listen to the way the machine talks." The discovery was a breakthrough, resolving the persistent issue that had plagued the prototype program for months. Colonel Davies was informed immediately and expressed his profound gratitude for Emily's invaluable contribution. Her unconventional approach, informed by her unique past, had succeeded where traditional methods had failed. The whispers about the quiet mechanic in the Mojave Desert now carried a new weight, solidifying her reputation not just as a skilled repair technician, but as someone with an extraordinary, almost intuitive understanding of the complex dance between human and machine in the realm of aviation. And for Emily Tran, the project had served as an unexpected bridge, connecting the two distinct chapters of her life, proving that the skills and experiences of her past, though carefully guarded, remained an undeniable and invaluable part of who she was. The successful diagnosis of the prototype's flaw cemented Emily's reputation not just within the air station, but within a specialized, highly discreet segment of military aviation. Her unique background, once a closely guarded secret, was now viewed as an invaluable asset. Colonel Davies, impressed by her insight, began to consult with her regularly on other challenging mechanical issues that stumped conventional methods. She became the go-to person for the seemingly unfixable, her unassuming presence in the hangar belying her extraordinary impact. Her relationship with Captain Hale deepened, evolving from professional respect to a genuine, if quiet, camaraderie. He would often seek her out, not just for technical advice, but to discuss the nuances of flight, the challenges of pushing advanced aircraft, and the subtle art of machine intuition. He recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone who understood the silent language of the skies in a way few others did. They sometimes shared a coffee from the daily grind, sitting on an overturned crate in a quiet corner of the hangar, talking not just about helicopters, but about life, about the weight of expectations, and the unexpected paths their careers had taken. Hale, in his own way, became her unofficial protector, subtly deflecting curious inquiries about her past, respecting the boundaries she had so carefully drawn. For Emily, this newfound recognition brought a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. She appreciated her expertise being valued, but the increasing visibility sometimes felt like a spotlight on the past she had meticulously tried to obscure. The quiet anonymity she had found in the Mojave was slowly eroding, replaced by the hushed whispers of her legend spreading through the ranks. One day, a request came directly from the Pentagon. A highly classified, multi-service task force was being assembled to address a critical, recurring issue impacting advanced rotary wing operations across different branches. They specifically requested Nightshade's expertise. The call sign, long a whisper in the shadows, was now being openly used in official communications, a clear indication that her former life was fully exposed. Colonel Davies personally delivered the news. "Ms. Tran," he said, his voice serious. "This is a direct request from General Albright. They need your unique insight, your experience with Phantom Squadron, your work on the prototype. It all points to you as the indispensable person for this task." Emily felt a familiar tension tighten in her chest. This was it. The full plunge back into the world she had left behind. "Colonel, I'm a civilian mechanic. My contract is with this air station." "Your contract can be adjusted, Ms. Tran," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about a job anymore. It's about a national imperative. Your specific skill set is uniquely suited to solve this problem, which is affecting multiple critical programs." He laid out the details. A highly sensitive, long-term project at a secure facility, working alongside top engineers, scientists, and flight personnel from various branches. The scope was immense, the stakes incredibly high. It was a challenge that would demand every ounce of her intellect and intuition. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing through the implications. The quiet life, the anonymity, it would all be gone. But the call to serve, the challenge of a truly complex problem, resonated deeply within her. It was the same pull that had drawn her to aviation in the first place, the drive to understand, to master, to push the boundaries of what was possible. And deep down, a part of her, the pilot she once was, recognized the profound honor in being chosen for such a critical mission. She thought of the young pilots she now saw every day, pushing their limits in the skies. She thought of the countless lives that depended on the reliability of these complex machines. Her work, she realized, was more than just fixing helicopters. It was about ensuring the safety of those who flew them, about contributing to a greater purpose. "I'll need time to consider it, Colonel," Emily finally said, her voice steady. Colonel Davies nodded. "Of course. But understand, Ms. Tran, this opportunity, and this need, will not wait indefinitely." Emily left his office with a profound sense of destiny. The Mojave Desert, with its endless expanse of sky and dust, had been her refuge, her quiet escape. But it was also the place where her past had finally caught up with her, not as a haunting shadow, but as a compelling summons. She was still just a mechanic, by choice and by trade. But the world had recognized the extraordinary pilot hidden within her, and it was now demanding her unique light to shine once more. Her journey from the shadows of a legendary call sign to the reluctant center of a critical national mission had truly begun. The weight of Colonel Davies' words lingered long after Emily left his office, settling in the quiet corners of Hangar 7 like the omnipresent dust. The proposition from the Pentagon wasn't just a career change. It was an invitation to re-enter a world she had deliberately left behind, a world of high stakes, profound secrecy, and the constant hum of adrenaline. The Mojave Desert, with its predictable rhythm of sun-drenched days and star-choked nights, had offered her a refuge, a place where the echo of her call sign, Nightshade, remained a distant memory. Now, that echo was growing louder, demanding a response. She spent the next few days immersed in her routine, each wrench turn, each diagnostic check, a familiar comfort. Yet, her mind was elsewhere, grappling with the choice. The quiet life she had built was precious. She enjoyed the tangible satisfaction of fixing a tangible problem, the camaraderie with her fellow mechanics, and the anonymity that allowed her to simply be. But then, there was the other pole, the magnetic draw of a complex challenge, the innate desire to understand the intricacies of flight, to push the boundaries of what was known. The Phantom Squadron era, with all its shadowed dangers and profound losses, had also been a time of unparalleled intellectual and operational intensity, a period when her abilities had been stretched and honed to their sharpest edge. She confided in Captain Hale over a quiet dinner at a small diner just outside the base. He listened patiently, his steady gaze reflecting understanding. "It's a big ask, Tran," he acknowledged, stirring his coffee. "Going back to that level. But they wouldn't ask unless they absolutely needed you. Your insights, they're unique. But at what cost, Marcus?" she asked, using his first name for one of the rare times. "The secrecy, the isolation, the constant pressure. I chose this life, this hangar, for a reason." He nodded. "I know, and it's a valid reason. But sometimes, what we're best at, what we're uniquely suited for, it calls to us. And sometimes, that call is for something bigger than our own comfort." He didn't pressure her, simply offered his perspective. Bored of his own experiences in the demanding world of military aviation, his words resonated deeply, tapping into a sense of duty she thought she had buried. After nights of restless contemplation, weighed down by a sense of obligation to the very machines and pilots she had dedicated her life to, Emily made her decision. The call from the Pentagon, the urgent need for her specific expertise, was undeniable. She couldn't ignore it. It felt like a fundamental part of her identity. The pilot and the problem solver was being summoned back into active service, albeit in a civilian capacity. She would leave the Mojave. She would answer the call of Nightshade, one last time. The transition was swift and shrouded in secrecy. Emily packed her sparse belongings, said her goodbyes to Rays and Mark, who, though sad to see her go, understood the gravity of her departure. She offered no explanations, simply stating she was taking a new, specialized position. The faded Phantom Squadron patch was carefully removed from her locker, packed away with her most cherished personal items, a silent companion on her journey into the unknown. She was transported to a remote, highly secure government facility, its location undisclosed, nestled deep within a sprawling, nondescript landscape. The air felt different here, charged with an almost electric tension, a constant hum of classified activity. Her new workspace was a sterile, brightly lit laboratory, a stark contrast to the grease-stained familiarity of Hangar 7. It was dominated by a large, complex simulator, its screens displaying reams of flight data and various disassembled components of an advanced rotary wing platform, unlike anything she had ever seen. The task force was a formidable assembly of minds. There was Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant but intensely theoretical aeronautical engineer with a penchant for complex mathematical models; Dr. Lena Petrova, a stern-faced material scientist, specializing in cutting-edge alloys; and Commander Alex Viper Jenkins, a test pilot with a reputation for pushing boundaries and an unnervingly analytical mind. They were joined by a rotating cast of intelligence analysts, software developers, and propulsion experts, all operating under the watchful eye of General Albright herself, a formidable woman known for her strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve. Their initial reception of Emily was a blend of professional courtesy and thinly veiled skepticism. They knew her name, perhaps even her call sign, from her recent work on the prototype and the whispers from Captain Hale. But her appearance, a quiet civilian mechanic amidst a room full of uniformed specialists and esteemed academics, seemed to challenge their preconceived notions. "Ms. Tran," General Albright stated during their first briefing, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We've assembled this team to address a critical, recurring issue impacting our next-generation rotary wing platforms. These aircraft are experiencing intermittent, unexpected power fluctuations during high-stress maneuvers, leading to significant performance degradation and, in some cases, near catastrophic failures. Our best minds have been working on this for months, with no definitive solution. Captain Hale and Colonel Davies assure me that your unique perspective will be invaluable." End quote. The problem was indeed complex. The engineers presented data models, simulations, and countless diagnostic reports. The fluctuations were sporadic, difficult to replicate consistently in controlled environments, and defied conventional explanations. They had explored software glitches, fuel delivery issues, atmospheric anomalies, and even pilot error, each theory hitting a dead end. Emily listened intently, absorbing every detail, asking precise, insightful questions that sometimes caught the other experts off guard. She wasn't interested in their theoretical constructs or their abstract models. She wanted to understand the machine's experience, the forces acting upon it, the way it felt under stress. Her approach was fundamentally different. While the engineers sought statistical patterns in data streams, Emily focused on the narrative of the aircraft, how it responded, the nuanced way its systems might interact under extreme duress. She demanded access to raw flight data, not just the filtered summaries, looking for microfluctuations, imperceptible tremors that might signal a deeper systemic flaw. She requested to spend time in the simulator, not to fly it, but to observe its behavior under the problematic conditions, to feel the simulated vibrations, to listen to the digital hum of its struggling yaw. Components. Dr. Thorne, the aeronautical engineer, initially found her methods unorthodox. "Ms. Tran, our computational fluid dynamics models are highly precise. We've accounted for every variable." "But have you accounted for the unexpected, Doctor?" Emily countered, her voice calm but firm. "The way a microfracture, for instance, might only express itself at a precise confluence of aerodynamic load, engine torque, and hydraulic pressure. The way a machine, under duress, might talk in whispers before bursts. It shouts, 'Ow!' Her language, infused with the pilot's intuitive understanding and the mechanic's intimate knowledge of a machine's physical limits, often baffled the more academic members of the team. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, and her unconventional insights began to yield subtle but significant breakthroughs in their analysis, a grudging respect began to emerge. The ghost of Nightshade, the pilot who had once pushed classified aircraft beyond their theoretical limits, was slowly, imperceptibly, guiding the team towards a solution that had eluded them all. The quiet mechanic from the Mojave Desert was once again soaring, not in the sky, but in the realm of complex problem-solving, her call sign now a beacon in the highest echelons of military aviation.